On May 30, 2005, a group of students from Alabama, USA, were about to return home after a graduation trip to Aruba. Among them was Natalee Holloway, an 18-year-old girl who mysteriously disappeared in the early hours of the last day of the trip. She was last seen around 1:30 a.m. when she got into a car with Joran van der Sloot, a 17-year-old local student. Her friends and family waited for her until the last moment, but Natalee never showed up for the return flight. Her absence was immediately noticed, and upon arriving in the United States, her parents were informed of the tragedy. The investigation soon identified Joran as the last person to see her. However, his statements about what happened that night were inconsistent. Initially, he claimed to have dropped Natalee off in front of the hotel, but security cameras didn't show her at the reception, raising further suspicions. He later changed his story, claiming she had stayed on the beach, but other witnesses contradicted this. In addition to Joran, his friends, the Calpo brothers, were also implicated in the case. The investigation continued without conclusive results, and despite the efforts of local and international authorities, Natalee's body was never found. The case generated enormous media attention, but unfortunately, many answers remain unanswered. Joran van der Sloot was arrested several times, but there was never enough evidence to bring him to trial for his alleged involvement in Natalee's death. Furthermore, he was accused of other criminal acts, further complicating the search for justice. And although the case dragged on for years, Natalee Holloway's story is not completely solved. Don't miss the next details of this intriguing plot. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and turn on notifications, because Natalee Holloway's story still holds many mysteries you can't miss. The disappearance of Natalee Holloway, which occurred in 2005, is one of the most intriguing and mysterious cases in the history of disappearances in tourist destinations. Natalee, an 18-year-old girl, disappeared in Aruba after a night of partying with friends. She was last seen in a car with Joran van der Sloot, but her body was never found, and the case remains unsolved. With a series of failed investigations and several theories about what happened, the lack of evidence and the contradictory accounts given by Joran and his friends have further complicated the case. This mystery is not unique to the Caribbean region, which, despite being a popular tourist destination, hides a number of unsolved disappearances, many of them involving tourists. In addition to Natalee, another case that drew attention was that of Amy Bradley, who disappeared from a cruise ship in 1998 while traveling in the Caribbean. Amy was last seen in her cabin, but was reported missing after her family noticed her absence. Alleged sightings of her on a remote island were never confirmed, and to this day her whereabouts remain a mystery. Cases like Lindsay Baum, who disappeared in 2009 while walking near her home, also bear similarities to those of tourists who vanish without a trace in popular tourist destinations. The Caribbean, known for its crystal-clear waters and idyllic beaches, has a dark side. The islands, often small and with limited resources to handle major investigations, become vulnerable to unsuspecting tourists. The high influx of visitors, combined with local laws and police infrastructure that are not always equipped to handle complex investigations, creates an environment conducive to unsolved disappearances. In many cases, the lack of evidence and the difficulty in gathering information across different countries make solving these mysteries a nearly impossible task. These cases, though distinct in many ways, show that the Caribbean and other popular tourist destinations can be more dangerous than they first appear. Disappearances like Natalee Holloway's reveal a sad reality, where tourists become victims in places that should be synonymous with rest and safety. These mysteries continue to capture the attention of the public and authorities, who to this day search for answers. The case of Natalee Holloway, who disappeared in Aruba in 2005, is marked by a mystery that has never been fully solved. One of the reasons that made it difficult was the series of false confessions made by Joran van der Sloot, the prime suspect. Over the years, Joran repeatedly altered his version of events, making claims that did more to confuse than help the investigation. Initially, he claimed to have left Natalee at the hotel door, but this version was refuted by a lack of evidence and the absence of security camera footage. Over time, he made other statements, claiming that Natalee had been alone on the beach, but witnesses contradicted his story, leading to further contradictions and uncertainty. The psychology behind these false confessions is complex. In many cases, individuals like Joran may feel a compulsive need to manipulate the narrative of an event, whether to feel in control, attract attention, or even test the limits of police and victims. Psychologists say these individuals may have a trait called manipulative psychopathy, where the pleasure of deception is so intense that they become indifferent to the suffering caused. For Joran, his lies were not only a way to avoid responsibility, but also a way to remain in the spotlight, which only increased the pain and suffering of Natalee's family, who spent years waiting for a clear answer. These false confessions not only hampered the investigation at the time, but also prolonged the suffering of those involved. Each new confession gave the Holloway family hope that answers were close, but it soon became clear that Joran was merely making empty promises. This type of behavior also impacted the authorities' ability to conduct an effective investigation. Faced with an avalanche of contradictory versions, investigators had to spend time and resources investigating each new allegation, resulting in genuine leads being ignored or overlooked. The false confessions, therefore, not only delayed progress in the case, but also forced investigators into a game of cat and mouse, where the search for the truth seemed increasingly distant. Joran van der Sloot was born on August 6, 1987, in the Netherlands, and grew up in Aruba, a small island in the Caribbean. From a young age, Joran was known for his athletic ability and academic achievement, but also for his rebellious and disobedient behavior. Unlike many of his peers, who followed the rules of their parents and society, Joran frequently defied authority and engaged in risky activities. His adolescence was marked by partying, lying, and a certain disregard for the consequences of his actions. What could have been seen as typical behavior for a young man his age turned into something darker as he grew older. The disappearance of Natalee Holloway in 2005 placed Joran at the center of one of the most mysterious cases in recent history. When she disappeared in Aruba, Joran was the last person seen with her, which immediately made him the prime suspect. Although he offered several versions of what happened that night, none of them were convincing enough to solve the case. His indifferent attitude toward the investigation and his persistence in lying to authorities and the media fueled the perception that he was not only involved in Natalee's disappearance, but that he could be responsible for something much more serious. The psychology behind Joran's case is complex. He seemed to have a compulsive need to manipulate the truth, which manifested itself in his various versions of what happened to Natalee. This constant shifting of his story can be interpreted as a reflection of a pathological personality, where lying becomes a control and defense mechanism. For Joran, manipulation was not only a way to avoid blame, but also a way to gain power over others, as if he took pleasure in toying with the investigation and the Holloway family's pain. In many ways, Joran's behavior can be compared to that of other notorious criminals, such as Ted Bundy or Aileen Wuornos, who were also known for their ability to deceive and manipulate those around them. Like these criminals, Joran demonstrated narcissistic behavior, characterized by a lack of empathy, a desire for control, and a tendency to disregard the consequences of his actions. This personality type makes it difficult to understand the motivations behind his actions, as manipulation and deception become part of his identity. Before and after Natalee's disappearance, Joran demonstrated a pattern of behavior that suggested a lack of remorse, something often seen in individuals with psychopathic disorders. Even after Natalee's death, his actions, including false confessions and continued manipulation, suggest he was more concerned with his own protection than with the truth or the victims of his actions. Joran's behavior, therefore, was not limited to the Natalee Holloway case. He continued to demonstrate his darker side in other events, ultimately becoming a criminal with a history of manipulation and deceit. The Holloway family has lived through constant drama since Natalee's disappearance in 2005. When the young woman disappeared in Aruba, her mother, Beth Holloway, immediately began a massive struggle to uncover the truth about her daughter's fate. What seemed like an ordinary graduation trip quickly turned into a never-ending nightmare. Local authorities initially failed to treat the case with the urgency it demanded, leading Beth to question the Aruba authorities' commitment to finding answers. She found herself forced to act independently, seeking information and constantly applying pressure to advance the investigation. However, the lack of concrete evidence and the resistance of some involved, such as Joran van der Sloot, made the search for answers even more difficult. Over the next few years, Beth Holloway struggled with the frustration of seeing her suffering often ignored. She became the protagonist of a relentless search for justice, facing a series of obstacles, including the manipulation of Joran, who, in 2010, attempted to extort the family in exchange for false information about Natalee's whereabouts. Beth's pain and despair intensified when Joran repeatedly offered details about what had happened to Natalee, but always with the goal of obtaining money, deceiving and humiliating the family. The extortion was a devastating blow to Beth, who briefly believed she might receive some kind of answer, but soon found herself once again facing lies. Over time, Beth's pressure and emotional distress became apparent, but even in the face of pain, she never gave up seeking justice for her daughter. Natalee's mother became a tireless advocate for victims of disappearances, using her experience to support other families who had experienced the same tragedy. In her struggle, Beth faced the void left by the lack of information and the ups and downs of the investigation, but always maintained hope that one day the truth would be revealed. Over the years, she traveled, spoke to journalists, supported movements, and tirelessly dedicated herself to continuing the search, knowing that the answer to her daughter's disappearance still lay hidden. The 2005 disappearance of Natalee Holloway in Aruba was marked by a series of investigative challenges, and one of the biggest obstacles was the lack of physical evidence that could shed light on the young woman's true fate. In disappearances like Natalee's, physical evidence is crucial to establishing a link between the suspect and the crime, as well as providing crucial clues to solving the case. However, in Aruba, access to this type of evidence was extremely limited, which hampered the investigation and, over the years, prevented authorities from reaching a solid conclusion. One of the biggest limitations was the lack of advanced forensic technology available on the island at the time. Aruba, although known as a popular tourist destination, lacked the same resources as other countries in terms of forensic investigation. This resulted in the difficulty of effectively analyzing evidence and the lack of capacity to conduct a thorough search, especially in remote locations, such as the beaches where Natalee's body is believed to have been abandoned. Without the presence of DNA or other concrete evidence, the investigation hit a dead end. Furthermore, the nature of tourism in Aruba also contributed to the difficulty of solving the case. In tourist destinations, investigations often face additional challenges, such as the constant flow of people, the lack of detailed records of tourist movements, and even the interference of external factors, such as the desire to protect the reputation of the island and its local authorities. Mass tourism can make it difficult to gather accurate information, as many tourists who could be witnesses end up leaving the area before being identified or interviewed by police. Lacking clear physical evidence, investigations relied primarily on witness statements and the versions of those involved, which, as in the case of Joran van der Sloot, led to a series of contradictory and confusing accounts. Joran's own behavior, in providing false statements about what happened, made it even more difficult for authorities to form a solid line of investigation. This demonstrated how, in many cases, a lack of concrete physical evidence can prevent justice from being served. As without it, investigators are limited to assumptions and flawed testimony. Modern forensic technology, with its advancements in the use of DNA, digital analysis, and other investigative tools, could have made a huge difference in the Natalee Holloway case. The ability to identify traces of blood, fibers, or other materials could have provided the evidence needed to solve the mystery. But the complexity of the case required something more precise. Another factor that further complicated the search for answers was Aruba's tourism landscape. As a bustling destination, the island welcomed tourists from all over the world, making it difficult to gather detailed testimonies. The constant movement of people and the fact that many tourists returned to their home countries before being questioned made it even more difficult to reconstruct what happened that night. Furthermore, the pressure on local authorities to solve the case, coupled with international media attention, added an additional layer of complexity, as many involved in the investigation were under intense surveillance. This, in a sense, created an environment where the search for answers not only ran up against the physical limitations of the investigation, but also against local social and political difficulties. Over the years, the investigation into Natalee Holloway's case dragged on without much progress, with the suspects, particularly Joran van der Sloot, constantly changing their versions of events. These contradictory accounts and attempts at manipulation by those involved further hampered the search for concrete evidence. Without clear physical evidence, authorities found themselves trapped in a cycle of assumptions and false statements, which delayed the resolution of the case and created further frustration for Natalee's family, who remained unanswered for years. Natalee's disappearance not only exposed the limitations of forensic investigation on the island, but also highlighted the vital importance of physical evidence in any criminal investigation. The case of Natalee Holloway, who disappeared in Aruba in 2005, is one of the most iconic examples of how the media, and more recently, social media, have played a key role in keeping a missing person case in the public's mind for years. From the moment Natalee disappeared, the case was widely covered by international media, primarily due to the young woman being American and the mystery surrounding her absence. The news coverage, with daily and special reports, helped keep the case in the spotlight, ensuring that the investigations did not fall into disrepair. The media was crucial in keeping public attention focused on the case, creating constant pressure on Aruban authorities to provide answers. Over the years, the media not only reported on the investigation's developments, but also broadcast the Holloway family's statements, especially the mother, Beth Holloway. Her efforts to seek justice for her daughter were widely publicized, which not only brought attention to the case but also generated a wave of public support. The constant presence of journalists and cameras on the case increased pressure on local authorities, and, at one point, even helped move stalled investigations forward. Natalee's case became a symbol of how the media can influence the resolution of complex cases, as newspapers, television programs, and even international news outlets continued to cover the case, even when leads seemed to be running out. In recent years, social media has become an even more significant player in the investigation of disappearances like Natalee's. With the emergence of platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and more recently, Instagram and TikTok, the public has had the ability to discuss and share information in real time. In Natalee's case, numerous pages and groups were created to push for further investigation and help keep the case relevant. Social media mobilization brought visibility and constantly reminded authorities that the case could not be ignored. Furthermore, social media provided a new way for witnesses or people with information to connect with investigators anonymously, increasing the chances of crucial discoveries. Public pressure generated by social media was also a significant factor in the investigation. At various points, authorities felt pressured to provide answers as the case spread online, with users from around the world demanding justice for Natalee. The pressure on Aruba authorities, while not always positive, ultimately forced the police to pay more attention to the case, as a lack of progress could generate global criticism. Social media's ability to disseminate information quickly also helped garner international support, demonstrating how public engagement can influence the progress of investigations. Virtual mobilization, with petitions and online demonstrations, added another element of visibility that authorities could not ignore. Over time, the media and social media have changed the dynamics of how missing persons cases are handled, demonstrating that, in an increasingly connected world, public pressure can become a decisive factor in investigations. Natalee Holloway's case has become not only a criminal mystery, but also an example of how media coverage and social media mobilization can have a lasting impact on the search for justice. The case of Natalee Holloway, who disappeared in Aruba in 2005, attracted attention not only from the media, but also from criminology experts, lawyers, and private investigators who volunteered to help in the search for answers. The complexity of the case, marked by a lack of physical evidence and contradictory statements from suspects, required a specialized approach that could make progress where local authorities seemed stagnant. These professionals, with their experience in dealing with disappearances, played crucial roles, even if not always effectively. Shortly after the disappearance, the Holloway family, especially Beth Holloway, Natalee's mother, sought the help of lawyers and criminologists to better understand the nuances of the judicial process and potential flaws in the Aruba police investigation. They were concerned that local authorities were not treating the case with the necessary urgency and that there was a lack of concrete evidence linking Joran van der Sloot to the disappearance. Lawyers specializing in disappearance and human rights cases in particular advised the family on how to pressure authorities and seek justice, while also helping them develop a more effective legal strategy for the case. Private investigators also played an important role, acting as an extension of local authorities. Some of them were hired by the Holloway family to conduct parallel investigations, trying to piece together what the police seemed unable to. These professionals sought out witness interviews, explored locations and landmarks overlooked by the initial investigation, and attempted to uncover new information that could shed light on Natalee's fate. While many of these efforts did not lead to an immediate resolution, their presence ensured that the case was not abandoned, as often happens with international investigations involving missing tourists. Furthermore, criminology was essential to understanding the behavior of those involved, particularly Joran van der Sloot. Criminology experts analyzed his attitudes, false confessions, and manipulative behavior, which helped provide insights into how he might have been trying to manipulate the investigation. Psychological analysis was also crucial in understanding Joran's motivations and behavioral patterns, as he frequently lied or changed his version of events. This specialized approach brought to light aspects of the case that might have gone unnoticed without the application of psychological and criminological knowledge. However, despite the good intentions and hard work of these professionals, the lack of physical evidence and the constant shifting of Joran's stories further hampered the efforts of all involved. The contributions of experts and investigators were not enough to solve the case, but their presence was crucial in maintaining pressure on authorities and ensuring the case was not forgotten. Natalee Holloway's case highlighted the need for a specialized approach to missing persons cases, especially when the investigation drags on for years and public pressure becomes a determining factor in finding a solution. The work of criminologists, lawyers, and private investigators, despite their challenges, illustrated how essential it is to have a dedicated and specialized team when dealing with such complex and mysterious cases. The case of Natalee Holloway, who disappeared in Aruba in 2005, is a tragic and complex example of how the combination of public investigations, failures by local authorities, and changing accounts of those involved can delay the search for justice. Over the years, criminology experts, lawyers, and private investigators played essential roles in the case, even if their contributions did not always lead to concrete answers. The work of these professionals was crucial in maintaining pressure on authorities and preventing the case from being forgotten. Soon after the disappearance, the Holloway family found themselves in a maze of uncertainty, pressured to seek answers amid a seemingly aimless local investigation. That's when they began working with lawyers specializing in human rights and disappearances, who advised the family on what to do to demand greater commitment from the Aruba authorities. The lawyer's role was essential in ensuring the family didn't feel powerless in the face of the local legal system and in developing legal strategies that would keep the case in the spotlight. Even without conclusive evidence, these actions helped keep the case in the international media, with public pressure being a decisive factor in local authorities not abandoning the investigation. Private investigators were also crucial because, with local authorities' limited resources, they were able to work in parallel, seeking new leads or witnesses that could shed light on the case. Although their efforts failed to yield significant discoveries, their persistence helped keep the investigation active and challenge the authorities' inaction. Criminology, in turn, brought to light the manipulative behavior of Joran van der Sloot, the prime suspect, allowing investigators to better understand his patterns of lies and manipulation, further complicating the process of solving the case. Over the years, the involvement of experts has highlighted how complex disappearance cases, like Natalee Holloway's, require multifaceted and coordinated work to obtain answers. Even though Natalee Holloway's case has not yet been fully solved, the work of these professionals was crucial in ensuring that the case was at least not forgotten. Natalee's disappearance remains a mystery, but the search for justice has always been a priority for her family. If you're interested in this case and want to learn more about the impact of the media and experts on missing persons investigations, subscribe to our channel and stay up to date with other intriguing cases like this one. Natalee Holloway's story still holds many mysteries, and we can't help but keep following it.